Welcome to Inside R&E, Rosenberg and Estes' podcast. I'm Ben Williams, and today our topic is going to be the Pied-à-Terre tax, which is what everybody's calling and emailing me about these days. Our guest today is Martha Stark, and Martha is a former New York City Department of Finance commissioner and wears many other hats too. You're a professor at NYU,
Yes.
and what do you teach there?
I teach a couple of core classes. I should say, it's in their School of Public Affairs, so that's
Okay.
important to know. And it's all graduate students, all very serious and very much wanting to work in a public service. So it's fantastic. I teach financial management, so budgeting and stuff like that. And I teach management and leadership. It's a pretty cool course. Most people need real good management skills and don't always have them. And then to tie the two together, I teach performance management and measurement as well. Those are my three kind of main squeeze courses.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Do personal coaching?
I don't, but you kind of do that just through mentoring with
Okay.
students and stuff like that. And I have done that for several nonprofit leaders in the LGBTQ plus community. So yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely.
Okay, and are there any other hats that you think the
Oh my
viewers should
God,
know about?
what hats do I wear? So I'm the policy director for Tax Equity Now New York.
Right?
Tax Equity Now New York is a coalition of people filed a lawsuit in 2017, basically challenging the New York City property tax, and it's progressed in a way that no other suit has progressed in a very, very long time here. Court of Appeals issued a decision in 2024. And so we're working now, bounced a case back to the lower court. And so we're in the lower court trying to sort of figure out if we might be able to get the city to do the right thing vis-a-vis the people who we're representing.
Right, right. Yeah.
And, R&E is intimately familiar
Yeah.
because they're working with us on the case as well.
Yeah, we're very familiar with that case, and it's amazing how successful it's been so far. I mean, you can't win everything all the time, but it's still going.
It's
It
been a
still have
while.
life.
It's been a minute. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
been, as the young people say, it has been a minute. So,
yeah.
yeah, 10 years,
So
almost.
what do you want on your what's your epitaph? Is it gonna be, winner of tax equity in New York City? Is it gonna be former commissioner of finance,
No, it's actually gonna
mother to
be
beautiful children?
It's going to be, insanity defined,
Big
Stark
basketball
yeah, it's like
fan.
Stark working on, property tax issues for her entire life, hoping that things would change,
Mhm.
and, that's the clear definition of insanity, so I
Okay.
think that's what I'll have it say.
I think mine might say property tax nerd.
Yes.
I keep it simple,
Yeah, no, that is
despite all
good.
the other
I was gonna say
things.
that's a good one, but, property tax nerd squared, I could probably say,
Okay.
to infinity and beyond. I don't know.
Uh-huh,
Yeah,
uh-huh.
something along those lines. But
Right, right.
yeah,
Yeah, and hopefully, other things too.
yes,
Does amazing things for the world,
yes,
right?
something
That's
like
the
that.
point,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And maybe when Tenny's over,
Mhm.
you could be the policy director for Patenny. Patenny
It
is the
is.
pied-à-terre tax equity now group
Yes,
of
yes.
um, people who have second homes in New
Right.
York City, and they're demanding tax equity because they don't want to pay the extra surcharge,
Hey, all
right?
right, something like that. I mean,
I
I
just
think
made it up.
yeah, but that's a good one. I mean, I think, one of the interesting things is people used to say to me, "Don't you?" I grew up in public housing in NYCHA housing here in New York, and people would always say, "Don't you want to go like head up like NYCHA, do something with NYCHA?" And I thought, yeah, I would actually because I wanted to make sure that we're producing or doing housing that's good enough for us to live in, like for me to live in, for my family to live in.
Mhm.
And so I sort of had a little like logo that was sort of, here's my vision for sort of NYCHA. And then, one of the other interesting sort of things is trying to sort of take on, the idea of rent regulation and providing housing and how we do that in a way that actually makes sense, right? That, sort of certainly recognizes tenants, but also recognizes the real cost that the city itself imposes on managing and operating housing. So I think all of those, I've always been a housing nerd geek, and I've been able to kind of color that in the tax side of it, the sort of expense side of it.
Right.
But
You're never gonna retire, are
no, I don't think so. I think they're gonna be dragging me, out and,
you?
whether it's in a box or, with ashes, and they're gonna be like, "Let's sprinkle this all over New York City," because it is where I've certainly done a lot of my work.
We could have a ticker tape parade for you.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I was
What
at the
colors?
Liberty
Blue and
game.
orange or
I was at the Liberty game. I think it should be seafoam,
Okay.
yeah, absolutely. That's another area where people would say you're absolutely insane. I've been a Liberty supporter for 30 years, every single year with season tickets. So anyway, but
Amazing.
yeah, yeah,
Well,
fun.
I'm Ben Williams, and I'm a member at Rosenberg and Estes, and I lead the property tax department. Or I saw a partner of mine on a podcast the other day, and he said he leads the tax incentives and affordable housing group. And I had an idea that I'm going to be the leader of the unaffordable housing group at Rosenberg and Estes. So informally, that's my new my new title.
All
It,
right.
so the what is unaffordable housing? Well, our topic today will be the New York City Pied-à-Terre tax, which if you say it really fast or if you speak it into Siri, she always transcribes it as Pied-à-Terre
Yes.
tax.
Hmm.
Like I'm gonna
Yes.
be dipping some hummus.
Yes.
Right. So um, maybe we call it the surcharge.
Right.
I think technically it's the surcharge on high value homes that are not used as primary residences,
Correct.
something like that. I don't
Right.
think they have the word high value. They reserve the right to maybe change that threshold one day. We'll
Yeah.
see.
Sure.
And I have some other ideas about where that might be going.
Mhm,
Maybe they decrease the market value thresholds. Maybe they take in tenants.
mhm,
You are a renter here in the city. You don't file a New York State income tax return.
mhm.
As a resident, you're not paying your fair share.
Right.
That was one of the policy
Yes,
arguments
arguments
for
for it.
this. So
Mhm.
maybe they try to get tenants too. There's no stopping them now.
Yes.
Well,
That
the
sounds like a
door's
song,
open.
actually. I think I've heard a song like that. "Ain't no stopping us now." So, anyway,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, what is the surcharge? So we're almost at the 1 month inception date.
Mhm.
And I would call today the birthday
Okay.
as to differentiate the two because about a month ago and a couple days it became law
Mhm.
and it went into effect on July 1st, which is today.
Right,
So
absolutely.
today's a birthday,
Okay.
but it pretty much has no meaning this year, right? Because nothing's going to happen. I saw some articles saying, get ready for July 1. And I'm like, why? What's going
Why?
to happen?
Nothing's happening yet. Yes,
Nothing's
indeed.
happening this year on July
Uh-huh.
1 because the legislators passed the legislation, you know, in the in the dead of night when
Mhm,
nobody was looking.
mhm.
um, a little lack of transparency, maybe, but maybe they're not obligated to. I was thinking, shower thoughts. We're not really in a representative democracy, right? Or we are in a representative democracy. We vote for the leaders who vote for the laws. We don't get to vote on every single law.
Right, that's true.
So, you
Well,
know,
I mean, I do think, I think that point is well taken because unlike how a lot of legislation is passed, this one was made a part of the governor's budget. And
mm,
so because it was made a part of the governor's budget, the bill, was included with all of the budget bills, of which there were, quite a few.
right,
And so, typically something like this would go through, hearing at the sort of assembly side, at the Senate side, and then, maybe even some reconciliation before being passed. But because it was done as part of this, the state's you know, incredibly large sort of budget, you didn't get that same kind of sort of light in terms of transparency and ability to even comment on the bill itself.
Right. And if you were a legislator who voted against it because you didn't like the surcharge, you're also voting against a lot of
That
other
is
things.
correct.
They
That's exactly
they used
right.
to call it the big ugly,
Big
right?
ugly. Yeah,
Right,
that's
in the
absolutely
omnibus
right.
budget bills.
Yes,
Right.
absolutely. And the fact that, to me, that it's an election year for those officials, they certainly weren't staying around so long after the budget got adopted, since it was later, to have sort of conversations about this. So yes, you're right. It got, sort of, woven in there in a way that's very different from how typical bills, would go through, sort of Congress.
I thought it
I mean,
was
I'm sorry,
interesting.
through the state. Don't get me talking about federal things, but
I thought it was interesting that they made the public announcement.
Mhm,
They were so excited, the
mhm.
governor and the mayor, about this program, and all they had was the seed of an idea, right?
Yes.
Let's tax people whose homes are worth more than $5 million and they don't live here,
Right,
right? But
right.
then it took, what, 5 weeks or something, plus or
Yes,
minus, to finally, show us the legislation.
right.
And, um, so like you said, it didn't have a lot of optics before it got passed.
That's
Do you think it's ripe for I mean, there's already been one cleanup bill
mhm.
that fixed one
Yes.
word in the
Right,
statute.
right. Yes, absolutely.
Do you think that there's a possibility that they may go in and tweak some things
So I think
in
I
the
think there
future?
yeah, I think there are some things that need to be tweaked, right? And the Department of Finance, to me, there are a few people, few entities, few government agencies that need to tweak things, right? So the Department of Finance just issued some draft regulations and are going to have a public hearing on it. If I July 9th, if I'm not
Mhm.
mistaken. And I think it's going to be important for people to sort of get their voice heard there. So the Department of Finance did the right thing. They actually have put out some draft regulations, mostly focused a little bit on how they're going to assert penalties if you,
Right.
really don't
Mhm.
do things in a way that makes sense, with a very long statute of limitations that's 6 years, which is not really typically. Taxes are, you can audit them within 3 years, 6 years if you think there's fraud of some sort, and then unlimited if there's a filing that you were supposed to do that you didn't. And so this 6 year statute strikes me as like, you're going to go back for 6 years to try to sort of figure out if people have done the wrong thing. So, this sort of emphasis on penalties versus actually transparency in the rules so that people can comply. Those people who want to comply strikes me as not the right quite balance in the rules and regulations. Also, we're sort of encouraging them to opine on scenarios, right? I mean,
Right.
that's been kind of an important way that a lot of regulations get promulgated is, if you have some examples, tell us how those examples would be viewed by the agency, and then at least that way people can kind of get an understanding or see something, a fact pattern that's meaningful to them within those sort of regs. I'm hoping that they'll do that kind of thing as well. But kind of concerning to me is that the tax commission, agency you know really well, the New York
Mhm.
City Tax Commission hears property tax appeals. They've been vested with some authority in this legislation that they didn't have in the past.
Right.
One is that they actually have to take a look at market value. Um, they don't usually, I mean, it's maybe, for some of our listeners, the city, unlike many other places, values property. So what do you think this property is worth? And they have a couple of tools at their disposal to decide that. But then they don't stop there. They assess it at a percent of value, right? So they say your property is worth $100. If you're in class two, which is an apartment building class, then they assess it at 45% of that number. So then you're getting something that says $45. The tax commission here is the $45 piece, not really. I mean, it's sort of maybe talking about the market value, but they don't have that authority, at least that's not how their operations are. They need to issue regulations, and they have not at all. as does the Office of Court Administration, because if you don't get, you're not successful at the tax commission, you get an opportunity to go into the court system at the Supreme Court level. And those filings are due, because you
Hmm.
get very busy around that time
Hmm.
in kind of mid the third week of October.
Right.
And so what's going to have to be wrapped in is any challenge to, is this my primary residence? And also, are they right to think that I have, in the case of 123 family home, a $5 million value? And by the way, this even $1 million value that's true for co-ops and condos, where that sort of falls. So I think we haven't seen any regulations out of the tax commission, and we haven't seen any draft regulations either out of the Office of Court
Yeah,
Administration.
right. I want to get into the difference between the state legislation and rules in a minute. Let's give a brief overview of
Mhm.
the pied-à-terre tax and how it works. So mechanically, it's really, if we try to keep it as simple as possible,
Right.
there are two worlds to look at, and where
Yes.
the two worlds collide, that's where the pied-à-terre tax sits.
Right.
So it's the valuation
Mhm.
and residency. That's
Yes.
how I think of it.
Yes.
And so for valuation, it 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 was $5 million, homes that are worth more than $5 million. And these are not apartments, right? People who own rental buildings. This is individually owned residential condo units. This is co-op
Mhm.
apartments,
Mhm.
and it's tax class 1 homes, which are 1 to 3 family homes in New York City,
Right.
how it's classified, right? So this also would include, so the co-ops and condos is tax class 2,
Right.
but also subclass 2C,
Yes.
which is a little nuance that we know all
Yes.
about. And they're even valued a little bit differently. But because the city doesn't already value condos and co-ops using sales-based market value. Sales-based is what you think of when you think, I own this, how much could I get if I sell it,
Mhm.
right? I used to be an appraiser,
Yes, I know that.
right?
Yeah.
So I would prepare very big appraisal reports
Mhm.
for litigation,
Mhm.
where the attorneys hired me,
Mhm.
which is what inspired me to go to law school.
Right.
Um, and we would look at comps. That's pretty much how you would do it. How much are other houses
Right.
or co-op or condo apartments selling for? So tax class 1 homes are already valued that way by the Department of Finance,
Right.
though most people don't even bother to look at it.
Correct.
So there's going to be a whole world, a whole new universe of people who are now getting smart to the Department of Finance's market value. I always heard that DOF had, and maybe you were a commissioner there, that they had a team of PhDs doing detailed analyses and coming up with the market values. And I always thought, well, why do they employ so many people who are so well educated to do that when at the end of the day, most of the time it doesn't even matter because of the 6% caps on assessment increases, um, because the assessment is limited to 6% of the market value, 6% more than last year's assessed value, or 20% more than the assessed value from 5 years prior. And in most of those cases, due to the 6%, 20% increase caps, you're below the 6% of market value. And so, of what is it, 700,000 tax class 1 homes,
Mhm.
maybe a couple hundred actually even file tax commission applications a year. And of those, you could probably count on a hand or two
Mhm.
how many succeed in getting their assessments reduced.
Yeah, so, so that's an interesting sort of way of looking at. First of all, they don't have a lot of PhDs. They have a few people who are putting together the computer models that are trying to sort of churn the data that you just talked about. We do kind of on a natural, like we're like, all right, if I'm buying in a co-op building, how much did units sell for in my building, and the like. But they're churning, the 26, 27,000 sales with a real market value
Mhm.
into a system, and then trying to project values onto 700,000 properties. So a couple of things that I want to say. I mean, um, we talked about Tax Equity Now New York's court case, but the court case that led to the creation of this tax system goes actually back to the 1970s in Hellerstein. And one of the interesting things about Hellerstein that I always remember when I think about this is they worried, worried that if you value fractionally, so what you just described is finance says your value is $100, your actual sales price or market value is $100, we're going to assess you at 6% of that or $6. One of the concerns that was articulated is if you tell people $6, they're going to think two things. One, the first is you're an idiot if you think my property's worth only $6.
Mm-hmm.
The second is it's going to, I think the language they use is it's going to dupe them into a state of apathy.
Mm.
Essentially, as you just described, there's 700,000 class 1, 2, 3 family properties, 2,000 may be challenged every
Mm-hmm.
year. The other 698,000 have been duped into apathy because they're looking at their assessed value and saying, this bears no relationship to really what I think I would purchase my property for and the like. And why should finance do market values? Because it tells you whether or not people are being treated equitably. And that's the kind of underpinning of our tax equity now New York lawsuit is if you use the actual market values that finance itself produces, those however many PhDs you think are producing it, they think that's the value. And the one thing that you have to do is make sure that properties with the same value are assessed the same. And if they're not, then you're violating the law because the requirement is that those be uniform. Now, it could be uniform at 100%. Everybody that you think is worth $100, their assessment is $100, or it could be uniform at a different number. The city says it's uniform at 6%. It's not. And so they are, in our opinion, in violation of the law. And so knowing what the agency thinks your value is incredibly important because it helps you actually identify the really inequities, and they are significant in the 1, 2, and 3 family home category. We can talk about the others as well, but it's fundamental that people actually could look around and say, hey, Ben, you got $100 place. I've got $100 place. Why aren't we assessed the same and therefore paying the same
Right.
taxes?
And now we're going to have the surcharge.
Yes,
You'll have two identical townhouses,
that's
let's
right.
say, that are right next door to each other. The Department of Finance values both of them at
Right.
$10 million, right?
Correct.
So their pied-à-terre tax would be $80,000.
Correct.
But it depends on the use. If
Yes.
one, the Department of Finance says, well, this is a primary residence
Right.
of the owner or family member or leased to a tenant for 12 months with a bona fide arm's length lease, no pied-à-terre tax. And then the building right next door. So maybe in the one building, they live there 185 days a year.
Right.
It's their primary residence. And the other building, they live 180 days a year.
Right.
And now they have the identical property and they have to pay an extra $80,000 because they live there 5 days less than their neighbor.
Yeah, no, it's
just based on use.
That's absolutely right. And it's a little, that's kind of one of the heart of the issues with the pied-à-terre tax. And traditionally, let's make no mistake about it, traditionally, the way that you want to differentiate between whether or not you're a 180-day or 185-day person is you give a benefit to the person for whom it's their 185-day unit, right? So it's why jurisdictions will say things like, oh, if it's your, resident or whatever, you can have an exemption that reduces your taxes or an abatement that reduces your taxes. That does eventually mean that the 180-day person is paying more, but it's sort of granting a benefit for some desirable thing that you think matters. We do that in the case of senior citizens. We do it in the case of veterans, people with disabilities. We say we want to encourage them or at least help them stay in the place where they are. And the way that we're going to do that is by giving them a benefit. We're going to lower their taxes a little, even if you're next door to a person who's your age and not yet at the threshold to be a senior citizen and the like. So I think, again, your point well taken.
You think of it as two ways, right? They can add an additional surcharge to, quote, penalize you for not using your property the way that they would
Right.
like you to because they want you to pay income tax too.
Right.
Or the alternative, they could have just raised all of the taxes and then given bigger breaks,
That's
like a
correct.
homestead
That's
exemption,
correct.
which is what the advisory commission had suggested to
Right.
do.
I mean, I think, not just the advisory commission, but people have been saying that for a long time. Star was supposed to be kind of the equivalent of a homestead exemption. It works. I hesitate to say anything works well, but I was going to say, in jurisdictions outside of New York City, that star exemption does confer a benefit that feels meaningful to people.
Right.
In New York City, it doesn't feel so meaningful. It offsets like $185 of your
Right.
taxes. If you're just a regular person, a little bit higher if you're a senior. But yes, you're right. And so again, I wouldn't, the Tax Reform Commission report, talking about that issue. Yeah, the truth is, let's get everyone's taxes where they should be, which is part of the dilemma with the Pied-à-Terre taxes. It's being built on top of a system that is
Right.
acknowledged by everyone to be inequitable. So the example that you just gave of a $5 million place, one of them could be basically assessed at 1% of their value, and another could be assessed at 4% of their value. And the one that's assessed at 4% is getting the surcharge on top of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's an incredibly sort of crazy thing. And our sort of thing, again, with Tenny is, if you could absolutely have a uniform assessment ratio, which is well within the Department of Finance's authority, start there. Like, let's start from a system that's actually uniform. And then if you want to, again, for me, I would do it more as a carrot than a stick. I would say, I want to reward people who have been in their places for a long period of time. I want to reward people who actually make New York City their home and contribute in the ways that we think that they should, rather than I'm going to use this hammer and try to find, the people for whom, well, you're not quite there. And by the way, you're not contributing, as if paying property taxes isn't a contribution. It is. But, I do get like the income taxes, I think the argument that some people made is like when the firefighters are coming, they're not going to say, by the way, is this your primary versus not, and stop sort of doing that kind of stuff. But I do think fundamentally it would have been better to fix the foundation before you start adding on additional taxes. I wrote something about that, which I'm, happy to share with
I
our
saw in Vital
listeners.
City.
Yeah, in
They've
Vital
been putting out
City.
some interesting
Yeah,
articles.
pieces. In Vital City, I've done a couple of op-eds about this, but
Mhm.
I do think you have to fix things
Right.
first before you start. It's like having a rickety house on a very, very shaky foundation and deciding, actually, I'm going to add 3 stories to it, and not think that it's going to come crashing down.
Do you think that that was feasible for this legislative session to
And
be able to reform the tax system and to add a surcharge all at once?
so I'm going to take issue with the word reform. I don't think you have to reform the system. I think that the city should use the existing tools that they have, not only the existing tools, what the law says they should be doing.
Right.
And so the Reform Commission's like, everything's broken. We have to, reform everything. No, there's a couple things that the city can do, should do, must do within the existing law. So I'm not talking about a big, huge kind of reform effort. I'm talking about why is it true that you say my house is $100? You say mine and Ben's is $100,
Mhm.
and Ben's assessment is 1,
Mhm.
and mine is 6.
Right.
Mine
I
is 4.5.
I get calls from people whose houses are assessed at 4,
Right.
and they say, "It's not fair. My neighbor's is only 1.
Right.
How can you reduce mine, Ben?
Yes.
Fight it
Right.
and try to get it down to 1." And I say, "Well, technically, the city thinks you should be at 6, but their hands are tied by the law that they refuse to change."
Right.
So, there's nothing I can do
Yes.
for you, or nothing I will do
Right.
for you at this point.
Right, which is,
And
again.
then and
Yeah,
again, we're
sorry.
just talking about tax class 1
That's
homes,
correct,
right?
that's right.
Because we haven't even
We haven't touched on
covered.
the co-ops and condos.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I just one sort of, kind of quick thing about that is the truth is, um, what can the city do? Lower everyone to 1. They can do that.
Right.
Once they do that, then going to 100%, sure, maybe that makes sense. Maybe it's more transparent. Maybe people will understand it better. But the city has the authority to lower everyone to 1, and that's what they should do. And they can raise the same revenue by changing the tax rate
Right.
if they want. If they want the same revenue, what we want, on some level, is for the city to acknowledge that actually the people who have been paying at 4, at 5, at 6
Mhm.
are actually being harmed. They are not being legally assessed at a uniform ratio. And so 6 was not an aspirational target. I actually am the person who set the ratio at 6%, but I set it at 6% after it had been at 12%. Then we lowered it to 8%. I happened to be at the agency at that time too,
Mhm.
not as the commissioner. And then when I came into office, I said, it is not uniform at 8%. And so what would be uniform at that time, it was 2004, 6% was uniform. 6% is no longer
Right.
uniform, so you need to adopt a ratio that is.
Were people kicking and screaming when you did that? How did that how
You
did they
know,
take it?
it's funny, were they kicking and screaming? I talked to another finance commissioner later, and he was like, "It wasn't that big a deal when you did it." Well, it was a big deal at the time. So the people who kick and scream, were some of the budget people because they don't they think of assessments as driving revenue. And so if you lower assessments, then you're lowering revenue. Not true. Written a little bit about this too. You have to divorce those two things.
Mhm.
What the assessments are is just setting the base. How much revenue you want is independent. It's an independent conversation from what the assessments are. And too much of how folks think about this in the city is, well, we need assessments going up all the time so that we can actually get kind of more revenue from it. And I'm like, divorce the two. You can get as much revenue as you want, but the assessments, the base, should be legal and it should be kind of fair for people to sort of better understand. So I think that to me is one of those places where I would say, we were talking a little bit earlier about insanity.
Mhm.
I actually really do see this world a little bit differently than I think people who focus in on it from a budget
I wonder
perspective
how
do.
much of it is political in that, one thing is under the mayor's control and the
Mhm.
other is under the city council's control. And they have little fights, right, over the budget every year.
Yeah.
And the mayor's office essentially can raise the assessments, but
Yes.
the city council has to raise the rates.
Well, let's not talk about it as the rates,
Okay.
because again, another sort of area. Let's talk about how much money they want to raise, because what they're really doing is saying, we want $1 billion, we want $10 billion. That's the decision that the council and the mayor are making jointly. The rates fall out of
Right.
that conversation. So the real question is, how much money do we want? And I'm going to say this, the city council never wants to acknowledge. I mean, I have these conversations with the public all the time where they go to their council member and the council member says, we didn't raise your taxes. And everybody looks at them like they've lost their mind
Right.
because they have. They have raised their taxes. As a matter of fact, this year, the city council just did the tax fixing resolution.
Mhm.
They are raising the property tax by $1.7 billion. That is what they're doing. And they're going to say, no, we didn't, because the rates didn't
Right.
change. The property tax is different than the income tax. I'm actually working on another piece to try to sort of tease this out because, I've been slightly frustrated when I'm having conversations with people and they're like, well, but like in the income tax, the rate is blah, blah, blah. Well, the difference is, the income tax you bring to the, sort of thing, here's how much I earned. The sales tax is similar. Here's how much I purchased. So the rate, yes, is frozen. The property tax is not like that because the city controls the levers. They control the levers. It would be like getting in a taxi and the taxi driver says, oh, by the way, you're going to pay a fare that's based on the average of what the 5 people before me. I'm basing it on the distance that the 5 people before me went. I'm going to say, here's your distance. And then I'm going to multiply it by a rate. But actually, no, you know what? I really want $50 from this fare. And so I'm going to adjust this one or adjust that one. You have to acknowledge that you actually are responsible for how much money the city raises. That is the task of the city council and the mayor, and the rate is a derivative. It just falls out of the city determined your assessments. The city said, this is how much I want. Here's the rate that falls out of it. So I just can't get into this, I didn't raise taxes, because they did. And every year we write them and say, you raised the taxes by X amount. The property tax levy has gone up. I mean, it's gone up 65, 70% in the last several years with the city council saying we didn't raise taxes. Well, then who did? I don't know. Don't tax me. Don't tax the tax the one behind the tree. They could have been
lowering the rates all along while the assessments went up.
Exactly.
And get the exact same revenue.
Exactly.
Or even lower.
That is correct.
The taxes.
That's exactly
and say,
right.
look, we really lowered the taxes.
That's exactly right.
Last year we collected $35 billion, and this year we're going to collect $34 billion.
That is exactly right.
We lowered the taxes.
That's absolutely right. And so I'm always, very kind of picky and a little bit crazy about this sort of notion that they didn't raise the rate. Also, because there are 4 tax rates, and some of them go up and others go down. So
the overall rate that nobody actually
no
sees.
one pays. No one pays at all. So
I mean, comparing the income tax, you tell the government, this is how much I made.
That's correct.
So here's how much I'm paying you.
That's right.
And in the property tax, the government says, this is how much we want you to pay us. We get to decide.
That's right.
And for an income producing building, they get to decide, this is how much we think you should have made. It would be like an income tax where they said, well, you made $100,000 this year, but you're a lawyer. We think you should be making $200,000.
Yes,
so we're going to income tax you on the $200,000.
That's absolutely right. It's exactly like that. I mean, it's a great example of how the property tax is different. And so because of that, it's incumbent on people to sort of, to me, accept responsibility and accountability for the things that they really do control. And what they do control is you're on the assessment side. Here's what the assessment side is. And by the way, here's how much money we want. And so, the rate kind of falls out of it. And another kind of quick concern about, it makes you wonder about things like, the assessing team, they're human, right? And so if they think, oh my God, if we lower assessments, we're going to impact the budget, it might make them disinclined to do things that should be done in the property tax. I mean, I have that kind of concern. Like, you don't want to, the assessors are not the revenue raisers. They should not be. And so having assessment growth drive revenue growth is just a mismatch in policy that actually doesn't have accountability sit where it should.
When you were commissioner, did you have all hands meetings and talk about this and say, your job is to just accurately assess properties? We'll worry about the revenue later.
Absolutely. However, yes, I'm going to say absolutely. That was exactly how I thought about it. It's why we lowered the ratio from 8% to 6%. It's why we actually even talk to assessors on a regular basis about, being aware of when values went down. I mean, I will say when I was at finance, it was started in 2002. It was really post 9/11, and so we actually did have to take values down at that time. And I think it was, perhaps in the wake of a crisis, it was okay for the assessors to sort of get on board with doing some of that. But I think that it's really important to remind your assessing team that they are valuable. They are valuable even if assessments aren't going up. It's not based on, like, you're not the revenue generators. Your job is to get the base right. And getting the base right means, one, kind of complying with the law, but two, also doing this in a way that people actually understand and even comparatively understand.
So I wanna ask you this because we haven't really touched on condos and co-ops because
Yes.
I think this is really important
Hmm.
to get your take on it.
Yeah.
So co-ops and condos, unlike Class One homes, where the Department of Finance does not do sales-based
Hmm.
market valuations, they do rental-based valuations. Under law, they've been required to value co-op and condo buildings as if they were rentals. I tell people it would be like standing on the street.
Hmm.
You're looking at two identical buildings. One's a rental and one's a co-op, or let's say three buildings and the other's a condo. They're all the same.
Hmm.
They all look identical, same stories, same age, right? The theory was they should have similar or same taxes,
Hmm.
right? It shouldn't matter the form of ownership,
Right.
right? So that's made the valuations that the Department of Finance does different than people think about, right?
Yes.
So for the pied-à-terre tax, for the first 2 years, they call it phase one.
Yes.
So that would be the current fiscal year that just started today. Again, happy anniversary, birthday,
Perfect.
right? No, happy New Year, happy
Yes.
New Year,
Yes.
right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Happy fiscal 27 New Year.
Yes.
So this is year one, and next January 15th, 2027,
Mhm.
we will get the tentative assessments for the 27/28, fiscal
Yes.
28. So
Yes.
those will be the only 2 years, the phase one years, that the pied-à-terre tax will be based upon the rental-based valuations. And because they're disconnected from sales-based,
Mhm.
the Department of Finance created a proxy. They said, well, like, we just got to come up with some sort of estimate so that we can capture $5 million apartments.
Mhm.
So they made it up and made it essentially, if your DOF, Department of Finance market value, was 20%
Mhm.
of the 5 million,
Mhm.
so $1 million and up, then they would consider a $1 million DOF rental-based market value equivalent to 5. We
Mhm.
know that there's going to be buildings that are worth more or less than 5,
Right.
right? So it's not perfect, but laws are never perfect.
Mhm.
Um, and it's essentially for a regular tax class 2 property, which is then assessed at 45%
Right.
of market value. It's essentially 9%, right? If your actual assessed value
Mhm.
is 9%, right, of the 5 million,
Mhm.
so $450,000 and up, then you could potentially be subject to the surcharge,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And so I wonder how, if you were commissioner,
Mhm.
or maybe you want to answer this, how do you imagine the current administration, the
Mhm.
Department of Finance, is going to go about now valuing co-ops and condos for the first time ever
Mhm.
using a sales-based market value? Are they
S
just going to plug and play the class one model, and or is it something more complex than that?
so a couple of things. The first
Uh,
thing I will
and this starts for 2028,
28, that's
right?
correct. So in January of 2028, they will have values based on sales
Right.
price, right? So a couple of things. One is, just you said the Department of Finance came up with $1 million. I'm gonna say the legislation said $1 million. Now,
Okay.
the interesting question is, did finance give input onto
I
I
was going
don't
to ask you
know.
this
I don't
question.
all right. I don't know, if I would say that. I do think that there was certainly people taking a look at this. Was finance at the table? Maybe, probably. I don't really know.
Well, earlier versions had 300,000 as the assessment.
That's right,
So
and
now it's 450. So they
right.
bumped it up. So it's going to take out a lot of properties. And the ratio is different than how the Tax Reform Commission
S
determined it. Because
so
they said the larger the real world
yeah,
value,
the
the
lower.
the lower the
That's
ratio.
correct, that's
And
right.
that for 5 million and up, it was
Yes.
about 11%, not
So
20%.
so what's interesting, again, is I do wanna say earlier legislation in 2019 when they tried to do a pied-à-terre tax then, and it didn't pass, used assessed value.
Mhm.
This one uses market value, not assessed value, but your math is spot on, right? So, I think, it's a $450,000 assessed value, $1 million, sort of
Right.
market
As long as you're
value.
not tax class 2C.
That's right, exactly. And 2C basically for, our listeners are any buildings, if you're a co-op or condo in a building with less than 11 units is a best way to sort of describe it. They're a whole different animal that we could probably
They're
take a
they're
lot of
assessed
time.
less than 45%
Oh,
of market
they're
value.
yes, because they are like class 1 but they're not a separate tax class.
Right.
So, anyway, there's some interesting, issues there. So what I was gonna say, in sort of response to your, is finance sort of ready, and how are they going to actually sort of do this? I think that was part of your, question. I think it's important to understand the background because I actually like the way you described. You have 3 buildings. Basically, they're 3 high-rise buildings. One's a rental, one's a co-op, one's a condo, and you look at them and, yes, they actually probably within those units, they'll sell for different amounts, but they're kind of identical, and I always like to remind people of the history of why co-ops and condos were actually, um, valued based on rentals. Where that kinda came from, and
Okay.
the origins of it were a really good place, right? City has a very low homeownership rate, and so the idea at the time, and this is back in the early 1980s, was, are there things we could do to actually sort of think about how we increase our homeownership rate? That was something that they were focused on, and one of the things that was going on at the same time was that people were starting to convert rental buildings to co-ops, right? Weren't so many condos around at the time, but they were starting to convert. And the idea was we actually don't want to penalize you for that conversion by raising your taxes an enormous amount because of the fact that, home ownership matters and we want you to actually be able to maybe do some of that. And the other corollary was for a rental, we actually are not going to raise your taxes to your co op condo conversion potential. Both things exist. So we're going to value you based on as if you are a rental property. Now, because you're an appraiser, valuing by income is a legitimate approach. Valuing by sales is a legitimate approach. Valuing by cost is cost of construction plus land is a legitimate approach. So the income valuation is a legitimate approach. And if it has the right inputs, it could even generate a value that's maybe not identical to sales price value, but closer to sales price value. So our lawsuit, Tenney's lawsuit, actually talks about why doesn't the city use the existing mechanism that it has, which is to use more market rents when valuing high-end co-ops and condos, especially. So what is finance going to likely do? Because I want to kind of get sort of that in. What are they going to do? No, they're not going to take the class 1 model and do it, but they're going to develop a model based on co-op and condo sales prices. And so they're going to probably look at things. And, I don't have a PhD, although people have said they might give me an honorary degree in economics based on how I talk about things.
Hmm.
You're going to want to look and say, are there sales within a building? Are there enough sales within a building that you can take that and extrapolate to what the values are in the entire building? Are there enough sales in a neighborhood in buildings that are comparable? So it's going to be a tricky task, but I think, they'll likely sort of do it. I believe that the city should basically continue using the limits and say we're going to value these based on their operations, based on their income. And, maybe yes, you might want to get to a sales price value, but it's interesting in buildings where not a lot of sales happen and how you're going to actually extrapolate to come up with values. I think it's a yeoman's task. And are they up for it? I think I worry that they don't currently even follow the existing law, and so now they have a complication on top of it that, it's gonna be kinda hard to sort of get at. I especially, have concerns about it in the context of co-ops, right? I mean, I think the
Sure.
condos are a little bit easier. They're individual units, even though they're within a building, and you're gonna have to look at the building context. But the co-ops are, interesting in that how you allocate shares varies by building type. I live in a co-op. Our shares are allocated by essentially square footage, right?
Mhm.
But the people on the third floor, it's a three-story building, but the people on the third floor have decks. They have private decks. I'm sandwiched in the second
Mhm.
on the second floor with just 105 shares. But how that's done. Some people did it by sales price or offering price at the time that they were so doing it. And so without understanding those underlying dynamics, I think you could miss information about how those shares actually represent sales price, not to mention issues with how the co-op's going to collect the tax from people when
Right.
it's a building-wide tax. Lots of issues on the co-op end of this that
Right.
haven't really been resolved or addressed or just been poo-pooed as like, oh, that's an implementation issue. Just implement it. Thank you, co-op, for being our collection agent in this regard. So I do think there's a lot of fundamental things that have to be worked out. And basically, they've got what, 18 months to do
Yeah.
it. That's it.
Right. And they
Yeah.
had hired a year or two ago an AI company to
Yes.
do modeling
Mhm.
of co-op sales prices.
Yeah.
We don't know what for a
I don't know.
dollar. I think that's
Yeah.
what the city
That's what
record
it
has
right.
said.
That's what it said.
Yeah.
Really. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
So I wonder
interesting.
what happened with that.
Well, we'll have to see. I mean, maybe they actually already have those values in their hip pocket based on whatever this AI contract did. It'll be interesting to see. I do think that something that you're saying is I think there's got to be a lot more transparency from the Department of Finance about a number of things. So, one of the sort of ideas that I proposed is you're going to have to add some additional columns to the assessment roll itself, including things that tell us, for example, how many shares there are in each building. That's kind of like a mystery to try to find out at this juncture. And then how many shares you're actually allocating to each of the apartments. Sort of within, I think that's something. I also think that it's important for them to sort of say, which method of valuation they're using, right? Am I using cost? Am I using income? And am I using sales? And to have that sort of available for the public, people like yourself, attorneys in this area, to be able to check and correct where factually some of the information and inputs that might lead to their models could be wrong.
Well, I guess what they could do is, and they publish the co-op and condo rental comps. They could
Right.
publish the sales comps,
That's
like
exactly
for
right.
your apartment.
Yep.
These are the three sales that
That
we use, right?
absolutely.
Yeah,
Or we didn't have enough
that's not on the
sales.
roll, but
That's right.
it's a separate file,
Yeah, that's or we didn't have enough sales, and so we used an
right?
appreciation model.
Hmm.
And here's the appreciation that we use. We used
Hmm.
to finance when they would talk to me about the different models that they had. We actually floated one that we call the sales appreciation model, SAM. And it so happened my communications director's name was Sam, so he loved it. And essentially, it's like if you are going to use a sales appreciation model that's not particular to that particular home, you could say, we've noted in your neighborhood, sales have gone from X to Y. And so we've taken your value and gone from X to Y. Like there's so much more with you don't want to overcomplicate this because people hate numbers as it is, but you do want to be transparent about what you as the agency is doing, especially because you control that lever. And so it's all the more reason why you need to be as transparent as possible about what you're
Do
doing.
you think, or would you do pseudo lots for co-ops where each apartment or unit is given a fake lot number
Mhm.
for these kinds of purposes, for valuation, individual unit valuation
Yeah,
purposes,
I mean,
or
I
mhm,
I
and
think
then a percentage interest? Well, they already put percentage interest in the assessment roll for condos,
right.
but they could do that if they were to do a pseudo lot system
Yeah.
for co-ops.
Yeah, I do think that that's gonna be a useful thing to do, and then essentially can compile everything at the building level, kind of like they do actually for condos, right? I
Mhm,
mean, you look at that,
right.
7501, that's where all of the, water bills, like, so
Mhm,
you can have a overarching lot that represents the entire building. And then you can also have, like you called them, pseudo lots. The reason why they're pseudo is that, they don't track in the sales
Right.
system per se, but they would be, here's how much we're allocating to Martha's apartment 2D.
Right.
It's her 105 shares divided by the 2,125 shares in the building. Here's the percent. And then that way you can always see it and check it and be able to say, oh, but that's not right, or it is
Well,
right, or something, hopefully.
there's issues with that because
Yeah.
you can't challenge DOF's allocation method in a condo. I mean, there is a mechanism,
Yeah, there
but
is.
yeah, I wrote
There
a law
is.
journal article about it.
There is. I may have
I've
read your
never
law
seen
journal
anybody
article.
use it ever.
It's
I have a
so
guy who has 6 or 7% of
uh,
the common or of the residential share
yes,
of the common
yes.
interest percentages because the unit used to be commercial back when the building was condoed, and then it was brought in to the
Yeah,
R1 suffix.
right.
They gave him 20%,
Uh-huh.
and they brought everybody else down, and they all total 80%.
Interesting.
And the Department of Finance said, "Well, we can't reduce his unless everybody else
In the
agrees to
building.
raise theirs," and nobody's gonna agree to raise their
Well,
taxes.
it's
So
so
how do you
interesting.
challenge
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I don't know if you'll be able to challenge your allocation unless they come up with some sort of system, but you can challenge the end result, which is your allocation factor
Yes,
times the city's, overall market value.
right.
Whatever your assigned allocated value is for your unit. You can
Yeah,
just challenge that and say that's overassessed.
I think that that's a problem.
That's
I
what they
mean, in all
say.
honesty, no, and I think you're absolutely right. I got contacted a few years ago by a building where they said exactly what your person said. They're like, this doesn't make sense how these allocations are assigned by finance. And it happened to be a condo, and I said, well, you can fix it, but you need everyone in the building to agree to change these allocations consistent with whatever you think is makes sense. And what's again, this is maybe too much in the weeds, Ben. But what was fascinating about it was that um, uh, finance at some point, rather than use the condo declaration factors, they had said, well, we decided we wanted to use what the sales price represented as the total. And so my belief was what finance should do is on the ones where finance decided to vary from what the actual allocation was, they should fix those. It's one thing to say I have a condo declaration that's exactly that, but if I won't say arbitrarily, but without kind of full disclosure, made a separate allocation, those should actually be fixed and they should actually mimic whatever is in the condo declaration. I feel like that's something that should really happen because it's just not it's not fair to the people who are bearing a higher sort of percent than even is in the publicly disclosed condo declaration. But again, I could talk about this, and
Yeah,
now I'm going to pull up your
we're getting into the weeds.
article. Yeah, I'm going to pull up your article for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, the the Wall Street Journal had an article this morning about 432 Park Avenue,
Yeah.
and they went through the units to see which ones are over the market value.
Mhm.
And then they also looked to see which ones were getting the condo abatement. And then if as long as they're not owned by an LLC, because you
Mhm.
can't get the condo abatement if you own it with an LLC. So we don't know if it's a primary residence or not,
Mhm.
of the majority owners of the LLC, right?
Mhm.
That's how the statute reads. But if it's a trust or natural person owned condo unit and they're getting the condo abatement, you could presume that they're not going to be hit with the surcharge.
But but the thing, I mean, I think I just saw the headline, so I didn't read the full article as of yet. I think the point is, though, while the earlier legislation, the 2019 legislation said the co-op condo abatement sort of could be used as a test of primary residence, that's not what the current law says. In fact, it kind of
Right.
turns it on its head. And part of the reason is, for the co-op condo abatement, you could use 3 units in it. They also weren't 100% sure. I think that the folks writing aren't really sure that the brokers are, because it's your managing agent or the managing agency that's certifying for whom it is their primary residence, they weren't sure that that was a foolproof way.
Right.
And so I think they turned the burden a little bit on its head. And if I recall correctly, the proposed regulations don't say, oh, by the way, we are going to treat anyone receiving a co-op condo abatement as it is their primary
Right.
resident. It doesn't say that.
Right.
So I think they're going to oversend to people who they think are liable for this. And it's going to be a big number of people, because if the only thing that you can do is run $5 million or more for 1, 2, and 3 family homes, $1 million or more for condos in market value, $1 million or more of the allocated shares for co-ops. That's a
Right.
sort of separate, calculation that has to be done. You pull all of those numbers out, it's going to be a big number of people receiving a notice saying, we think that you are liable. I could be wrong. Maybe they're going to look at the car condo thing and say, okay, we trust that these are actually these folks' primary residence. I don't
Right.
know. And so a lot of folks are going to be getting notices on or before August 30th, while their little people are in camp, or they're taking a
Right. Right in
vacation.
time for the Labor Day and the Jewish
Absolutely. That's
holidays,
exactly
and
right.
right.
That's gonna be the
Yeah.
time frame. So,
Right.
yeah, I think it's
September
gonna
is
be
going to be
crazy.
busy.
Yeah.
Um, w- so I'm actually a little impressed with how DOF was able to publish the proposed rules to implement the program. So there's legislation that the state uh, enacted, but then the Department of Finance, and it called upon the Department of Finance to promulgate rules to help explain how to run the program and to add definitions, and they added a lot of penalty mechanism, like you said. So the proposed rules came out very quickly. So they probably already had that in the works, when they were building all that. I'm impressed, but I think it kind of makes sense that they did it so fast, because by the time the comment period ends and then they issue their final rules and then they're adopted,
Right.
right, it will be time to send out the notices.
Absolutely.
And then you only get 30 days to
Correct.
respond to the initial determination notice
Right.
to DOF,
That's right.
right? Which that takes us to essentially end of September,
Right.
right? Which then gives the Department of Finance October to make all the decisions, because the tax bills come out in November.
That's correct.
Because this year's pied-à-terre tax, rather than being split with the regular semi-annual or
Yes.
quarterly payments,
Yes.
most people will be semi-annual,
Right.
it's all going to be due on January 1.
That is
Because the
correct.
program was a little late. But in
That's
the future
correct.
years, it'll be different, but
Right.
they have to have it ready for the November bill.
Right. That is absolutely
So,
right. That timing is.
what kind of confidence do you have that the Department of Finance can manage it all in the month of October?
So, a couple things. Can they manage it? Yeah. Will it be accurate? Don't know.
Mm.
I think that it's easier, speaking frankly, it's easier to bill and have someone challenge and say, "Up, nope, this is wrong," than it is to not. So again, I fear that what's going to happen is more people are going to receive bills that they should not receive than are going to, not get a bill and be like, okay, I'm in the clear. It's a real challenging mechanism, I think, for the department. And so what they will do is what they do well. They'll bill you and then leave the fight to you, to sort of get that corrected.
I think it makes sense because, people are the 6-year audit authority is only for people who have responded to those notices.
Right.
Right?
Right.
If you don't even get a notice, the
Yes.
Department of Finance can't come back 6 years later and say, we made a mistake. We didn't send you a notice. We should have.
Right.
Right? So if you don't get a notice, you're lucky. You're
Yes.
scot-free for the year.
Yeah, for the year.
Right?
Absolutely.
They can't get you for that
That's
year.
correct.
So the audit only applies, to people who get the notice.
That's right. And it's, again, an interesting question because of the retroactive nature of this, right? They issued the assessments in January, and suppose like you didn't challenge your assessment back then,
Mhm.
because you're like, okay, whatever, but now it has real significance for you. And so I think you're right. And so finance is going to be over inclusive rather than under inclusive for the reasons that you just stated. They can't come back, but yes, they can fix any kind of, possibly if it's brought to their attention, fix things that could go wrong.
Do you think there'll be another assessment role released in conjunction with the notices and say, here are all of the units in the city that we've sent notices to?
So
And
again,
here, yeah,
yeah. So again, I think, they should issue a new
and give you,
assessment
right, and
role
remind
with
everybody what their
some,
market values
that's
are.
right, with some additional columns and that clearly note who they're saying this is liable for. Like you said, they have some additional files, like you can get the abatement file, right?
Mhm.
And the abatement tells you which properties are getting abatements. What they need to do is have a file that's a pied-à-terre file that says, here are the properties. If you're on this list, these are properties and units that we are actually going to be saying are liable for the pied-à-terre unless they prove otherwise. I was going to say, the only exemption that I think that they're going to allow is if you're getting a senior citizen exemption, if you're getting a veterans exemption, if you're getting a star exemption. I had to point out to people, though, that the star exemption has an income limit on it. And so with that income limit, and if you're talking about a $5 million, 1, 2, or 3 family home, the likelihood that they're getting star or senior or whatever, senior citizen and veterans and disabled have a very slow income limit on it, is very slim. So again, I think a bulk of people are going to have to be watching this and worried that they might get this notice saying that they're
Right.
potentially liable. So
Yeah, yeah. House rich and cash poor,
that's correct,
right?
right?
But like you said, there's probably not that many. Maybe, your grandmother bought the house, the
Yep,
co-op in 1970 for $3
right.
and you just inherited it
Yep,
and you don't have any money. It's
that's
not
right.
means tested. The
No,
surcharge is
that's
not means
exactly
tested.
right.
It's assumed that if you own an apartment worth more than 5, that you can figure
You
out
can
how to
figure
pay
out
the
how to pay
tax.
for it. That's right.
Right.
That's right.
Right.
It's yeah, it's going to be challenging. And again, what I hope is, as finance is doing this, they also take it upon themselves, because I think it's important to be as transparent as possible about what it is they're doing, so that mistakes, can be corrected in a way that really makes sense. I also think that, on the primary residency side, they should be saying, here are things that are presumptively mean that it's your primary resident. And there can be a slew of things that reaches, and that should be included in the regulations.
Mhm.
If you have, again, filed a New York State tax return where you paid city taxes, right?
Right.
Not, so you live in, Westchester or Nassau, Suffolk, and you pay state taxes, not enough. You
Right.
also have to have paid city
Well, they'll look at
taxes.
the IT 201 form
Yep,
and see what address you wrote,
right.
right? And then
Yep,
there's a line that says your permanent home address, if
yes.
different than above,
That's right, that's
right?
right.
And if the address matches,
Yes,
then that should be presumptive
that's
that
correct.
because one of the intents of the law was to extra tax people who weren't paying income
That's
taxes.
correct,
So
that's right.
if you are filing that, then you are paying the income
That's
taxes.
exactly right. And
Right,
again, the sort of caution is, if that address needs to be a city address
right, right.
along with
Has to be that apartment.
that. Exactly
But if you
right.
own 2 apartments, you
That's
only
right.
get 1.
That's exactly right.
Right.
That's right. So I do think that the marriage of the income tax and the property tax is always a tricky one. In part, the state, administers the personal income tax on the city's behalf, and on your income tax return, you don't list your block and lot, right? So it's sort of a interesting, kind of mismatch, if you
Mhm.
will,
Right.
that now requires them to be reading a text line
Mhm.
and matching that text line to, a block and lot line,
You
as
wrote apartment
well.
10A, but
That's right.
it's really 10AB
AB.
because you had
That's
combined
that is
B
correct.
into it,
That's exactly
and
right.
they're gonna go get you for B.
Yes.
and be.
That's absolutely right. So
Right.
it's so, a lot of those things are really difficult. Like, I mean, I don't think it's easy to do because most people don't know their block and lot. I remember when I
Mhm.
was a finance commissioner and the city still had a lien sale. I was at a meeting briefing city council members, and I said to them, because we used to publish in the newspaper this laundry list basically of the block and lots that owed property taxes, no addresses, the
Okay.
block and lots. So I said in this meeting, this council meeting, because I wanted to expand the notice that we were providing so that it had address as well. And they were telling me it was going to cost too much, because the ads ran pages and
Mm.
pages in different newspapers. All the newspapers were like, oh, choose me, because it netted them quite a bit of revenue. And so I walk into this meeting, want to add addresses. And yes, it's going to add a cost to the lien sale. And they were like, well, why do you need to add addresses? And I said, well, let me ask you, how many of you here know your block and lot? Nobody. No one raises their hand. I raised my hand. 3 1066 lot 32, right? I raised my hand. And it turns out that actually one of the council members, his property was on the lien sale
Mm.
list, and he had no idea
Right.
because it was listed by block and lot. So this whole kind of delink of block and lot and address is an important.
Maybe they'll add that field to the IT 201. What's your block
Yes,
and lot?
that's exactly right. That would
Mm.
be useful. Yeah,
Yeah.
useful.
Well, Martha, this has been a great conversation, and I was racking my brain over, what I was going to ask you, but I knew it would just flow really well. So I think we just barely touched on everything. But people can learn more about the law on Rosenberg and Estes website. I've written some blog articles about it. You've created a tool. I've explored it, and I call it like a choose your own adventure. You remember those books where
Yes,
it said, if you
absolutely.
want the person to die, turn to page 33, And so you can kind of explore all of your different
Yeah.
scenarios. We'll include a link to your tool,
Mhm.
which asks you questions about your residency and how you use the property.
Right.
And it can kind of, at the end, give you a red warning, like you're doomed, or a green, no worries,
Right.
but no guarantees,
Right,
or
absolutely.
a gray, right,
Yes.
orange, like
Yes.
call your attorney
Yes.
or call your accountant.
Yes. And so, yes, all of that, and also will tell you what kind of information you should keep and gather,
Mhm.
just so that if you get questioned about it, what you should have. And the tool is actually living in two places. It's living on the Real Estate Board of New York's website, and so we can get you the link exactly to where it is. But it's also living on my small law firm's website, Start Patch Legal. And so the website there is startpatchlegal.com. And it's a kind of user friendly tool, and also kind of cites places where we don't know the answers, but I'm hoping that, the Department of Finance will answer
Right.
some of those questions.
Great. That's great that you built that, and it will help a lot of people.
Yeah,
And we'll include links to that in the podcast
absolutely.
show here. And I'm Ben Williams, and you can contact me at 212-551-1246 or bwilliams@rosenbergestes.com if you think that you are going to have to pay the surcharge and you want to, protest that with the city, or protest the value. You think they said your property is worth 10 million, but it's not worth more than 9 million, as an example. So you can contact me for that. And I thank you for your time, and happy birthday. We got you a cake.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you
So
for having me here. I
yeah,
really enjoyed the conversation, as I do always. Oh my goodness, it's cupcakes.
Magnolia Bakery.
Wow, fantastic. Thank you so much.
Right.
It's ironic that my birthday is the end of the city's fiscal year, but it is. And so
It makes it easier to remember your own birthday, right? Because
absolutely,
sometimes people
absolutely.
forget
That's right.
it.
Or they forget it's the end of the fiscal year and they remember my birthday.
Right, right, right.
So
Well, thank you very much,
thank you.
Martha. Yeah.
Thanks.